Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this event, which was part of the IT Ethics and Law Lecture Series at Santa Clara University. My name is Irina Raicu, and I'm the director of the Internet Ethics Program at the Markkula Center for Applied Ethics. If you'd like to be notified about future events in the series, please go to the Markkula Center website and join our mailing list. We anticipate quite a few questions, so please make sure to put those in the Q&A below. We'll try to get to as many of them as possible. And without further ado, I'll just get us started and introduce our panelists. As I am not a large language model, I will not start by saying that generative AI has taken the world by storm. I will say instead that it already plays powerful roles and that it comes surrounded by ethical and legal issues, only some of which we will unpack today. The environmental impact and content moderation of generative AI, for example, are issues that we might leave for future conversations. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from three experts who will help us get a clear understanding of the ways in which these new AI tools might reshape or be reshaped by developing norms and laws. Let me introduce them. Dr. Maya Ackerman is a world-renowned researcher in generative AI, assistant professor of computer science and engineering at Santa Clara University, and CEO of generative AI startup Wave AI. A pioneer in the space, she has been researching generative AI models for text, music, and art since 2014. She has over 50 peer-reviewed research publications, is a member of the steering committee of the Association on Computational Creativity, and was named Woman of Influence by the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Professor Kathy Aoki is a multidisciplinary visual artist who uses satire to critique the value systems that dominate gender, pop culture, and politics. Her printmaking work can be found in major collections, including the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco. She has been an artist in residence at numerous venues and has completed commissions for the San Francisco Arts Commission, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts Museum, and the San Jose Museum of Art. She teaches studio art at Santa Clara University. Professor Tyler Ochoa is a recognized expert in copyright law and rights of publicity. He joined the Santa Clara University School of Law in 2003. Prior to his academic work, he served as a clerk for the Honorable Cecil F. Poole of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and as an associate with the law firm of Brown and Bain, where he specialized in copyright and trade secret litigation involving computer software. He is a co-author of a leading copyright casebook titled Copyright Law, and the author of annual updates to a comprehensive treatise titled The Law of Copyright. I'm going to ask Maya to get us started by giving us just a basic description of what generative AI models are and do. How is generative AI different from other types? And can you talk a little bit also about how you use it in the process of composing?
Sure, a pleasure. So what is generative AI? Fundamentally, it's AI that makes things, AI that actually creates original content. It's extremely old. We've had precursors to that around the 1950s. It looked a little different back then, but the core concept and incredible systems that make art and music and write stories have existed in various forms for many decades. They just were not in public awareness. The type of AI that people were more aware of was focused on more traditional applications of machine learning, such as recommendation engines. So essentially, AI was used to predict stuff, predict if a stock is going to go up or down, predict if you're going to enjoy watching a particular show or enjoy listening to a particular song. And we've gotten really used to that and sort of fairly comfortable with this sort of application of AI. But the gap between generation and prediction is actually really small. If I can predict, I can generate. So let's say I'm trying to write a story and I'm just going to predict what the next word is going to be. And then I'm going to agree with myself, with my own prediction, and go ahead and predict the next word. And that is how this works. This is sort of a very simple explanation of how generative AI works. It leverages machines' predictive capabilities in order to generate, to create things. So that's the foundation of it. In terms of how I used it, together with my students, created a whole bunch of different systems My favorite application closest to my heart is around music. That's what I do at Wave AI, where we create systems that help people write music. Important distinction there. It doesn't write music for them. It really helps. So it comes up with little phrases for melodies and lyrics that a person can choose to incorporate into their art or modify however they see fit. And of course, just ignore or not ask for assistance when they're not looking for assistance. So we really use generative AI to break through creative barriers for people to make human beings more creative.
Can you talk for a second about the training data for these new models?
There is a wide variety of ways of doing that. There's so much attention on data right now, rightfully so. Some of the earliest models, and if you kind of look before the current explosion, you had a lot of specialized models. So some of the earliest models that I built were trained on, let's say, 25 songs. There's a lot you can do with really tiny data sets where you can really curate heavily and make sure that you're making the kind of decisions that you want to make. What started happening with OpenAI, one of the most incredible things that they did, and kind of the most questionable, is train on about 10% of the internet for their language models. And that's where curation becomes impossible. Like, you can't curate 10% of the internet, and kind of a lot of other sort of questions arise from this way of relying on data. Another thing that I like to point out, which is, I'm sure we're going to have a chance to delve into a lot of the sort of legal and ethical issues, but just for kind of laying the groundwork, if we sort of just zoom out for a second, outside of the way that humanity has organized itself into mine and yours and all of that, it is incredible that we now built a brain that is trained on 10% of the internet. What does that even mean? We've never had this sort of collective consciousness and collective unconsciousness at the same time that we all have access to. So there's really something magnificent happening here that our legal system and our social organization and our financial systems are not very equipped to deal with. But it is fascinating and very powerful in ways that can be both negative and positive.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Kathy how you would qualify or what you would add to that description. What are your thoughts about generative AI coming at it as you do from the perspective of an artist who might use it and whose work might be used to train models?
Thank you, Irina. So I would classify myself as a traditional artist that uses a lot of digital tools. And so with the AI, I haven't integrated it into my work yet, because I would need to train myself on how to use it effectively. So a couple of things coming to it as an artist. First of all, I found that I'm not famous enough just yet to have my work stolen and then incorporated into these training sets. So if you ask for work in the style of Kathy Aoki, it doesn't generate anything yet. But I did notice that some of the works that I'm interested in commenting on in my own artwork, which pokes fun at various things that are already copyrighted or trademarked, those things have also been kind of scrubbed clean. So I do make artwork that, for example, pokes fun at the pop artist Jeff Koons, who made these shiny metal balloon dogs. And so when I asked for Dolly to generate an image with Jeff Koons' work, like buried in the dirt and abandoned, it doesn't have very good image references for that, because I think that they're all like kind of cleaned up. So an example of that I could share with you right now, here's like an example of my own artwork on the left side, which is a Jeff Koons work like buried in the dirt in the woods and then abandoned. So this is part of a series called Koons Ruins. And I created this image myself by hand. When I say by hand, I use digital tools to do that. And I manipulated the image and I painted in new forest reflections and all kinds of stuff to make it look like this is Koons Ruins. Then on the right, I'm like, well, what if I gave this kind of description to Dolly and what does it come up with? And so it's like very far apart, like extremely disparate. So in that way, not useful yet, because I would have to develop my own skills as a prompt engineer, perhaps, to get exactly what I want. Another example of how I might use it is for sketching. So this is an example of like a lipstick monument idea, as if like we were worshiping lipsticks, and here's some old ruins of that. And so on the left side is something, again, I put together myself in Photoshop from photos that I took, and then wanted things to be in certain places. the sketch on the right was generated very quickly with just a few words, but there's all this decision-making process that's absent in the one on the right. So like, if I added, have a more vertical landscape in an Asian tradition or something, maybe I would get a different kind of result. But when I say I want the tree branch to do this, it would be very difficult for me to ask for that. So it could only really be a starting point for me. And I can see already that it would take a lot of training on my part. I am interested in the idea of generating, your own custom network, like feed it your own data. Like, so if I fed like a small set of like 100 images of my own work, maybe I could generate work in my own style. So I haven't yet explored that. Another thing I'd like to add as a visual artist is the acceptance of AI generated work in like competitions and galleries and things like that. So there is, for example, this year, an open call for Bay Area artists to enter the De Young Museum's open salon competition. And they are accepting AI generated work this year, which seems new. I'm sure Tyler is going to touch on this, but the idea of, copyright and whether or not the artist's hand has touched it or the artist made decisions in the work seems to be like the key point. I find that not many artists are like really that easygoing. Like a lot of artists are extremely picky about what they want to produce. And so you don't get that right off the bat with these generative tools just yet. So you'd have to be able to get exactly what you want, or as an art director, make me a tea kettle with a cat paw on it or something, and now I want it in blue or green or whatever. And you have to, it would be hard to get exactly what you want at this point without like really investing a lot of training. So in that way, I don't feel really threatened by the generative art, but I am excited about using it as a tool the same way I use like Photoshop and Illustrator and other, digital photography as a basis for my work.
So a couple of follow-ups. You said that you can't at this point generate art in the style of Kathy Aoki, but I'm sure that some of your images are in the training data. Does that concern you just as a sort of issue in itself? And would it concern you if a more powerful model could generate art in the style of Kathy Aoki?
Well, you shared, there's a website that you shared with you recently, Irina, that you can search to see if your artwork is part of the training set. And mine is not. But there is also another tool that artists can use if they're concerned about that. I mean, it's always a conflict in the artist between sharing your work, even just like having a website means that even if you put all the copyright marks you wanted on it, entry, it's just available for sharing and people are going to take it. So, and robots are going to take it. So there's always this conflict between how much do you want to give away as an artist and how much do you want to retain and hopefully like get recognition or compensation for it. And so there is another way for artists to kind of do a in-between thing, which is, I believe from the University of Chicago. It's a way to kind of put a glaze over your images. And what it means is kind of manipulate the data in your image so that it's a little bit more difficult for to be trawled for a training set. So I find that idea kind of fascinating. It's the same way like you would put on a shirt that, or a hat or makeup that stops you from being, recognized. The same way you could also do that to digital images. So I was excited to learn about that. I'm still like want to be recognized. I'm not really ready to use that tool unless so I don't know, but other artists have had trouble where their style is so recognized that they're just a common prompt, make work in the style of, person X. And that dilutes the capacity of that artist to be recognized and compensated for their work. And so it's not my problem just yet, but it has been for other artists.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Tyler next. Can you give us a sense of some of the legal issues that have come up around generative AI and intellectual property? There are, of course, other legal issues like privacy, but we're going to concentrate now on the copyright ones.
Sure. So in the copyright world, there's generally 3 types of legal issues that are commonly being discussed, and we've started to see some of the first lawsuits concerning generative AI. So the first set of issues concerns the training data. So in order to train a generative AI, it has to ingest large amounts of data from somewhere. And it does that by copying data. And so anytime you're copying data that of any kind, whether it's text data or image data, any kind of data that represents something that is eligible for copyright protection. Anytime you're copying things, that is potentially a copyright violation, unless there's something in the Copyright Act that says it's okay. And the thing that's in the Copyright Act that AI modelists are relying on is something called fair use. And the Copyright Act says that the fair use of a copyrighted work is not an infringement of copyright. It gives courts some factors to consider in deciding whether something's a fair use. And so you have the whole issue of whether or not copying images, copying text in order to train an AI, whether or not that's a fair use, or whether or not artists, authors should be compensated when their work is used to train an AI. And we have started to see a handful of lawsuits about that. The second group of lawsuits that is going to be coming is what happens when an AI generates something that looks too much like an existing image, right? Something that it's been trained on or something that's ingested, or even perhaps incidentally or accidentally. It creates an image that looks too much like an existing image. It creates a text that is too similar to an existing text. Is that going to be copyright infringement? And if so, who's going to be liable for that? We haven't really seen those lawsuits happening yet, but it definitely is going to be coming. There are lots of anecdotal evidence that that generative AI is generating things that look like existing images or that read like existing texts. And of course, if a human did that, you would have the potential for a copyright infringement lawsuit. You're going to have that potential when an AI does it. The question being whether or not it's the programmer of the AI or the trainer of the AI that might be liable, or whether it's the user who prompts the AI to generate something that might be liable. And then the third set of legal issues that comes up is whether something that has been created by an AI is protected by existing copyright law, and whether it should be. And in the United States, the Copyright Office has given us an answer to that question. The Copyright Office says, look, existing copyright law was written to promote human creativity, and existing law is written with the notion that we're trying to give humans an incentive to create things by protecting that for them. And so the Copyright Office's answer is no, a work that is created by an AI model is not itself protected by copyright and is not copyrightable, which means that anybody could copy that. Now, you've had authors and artists who have created things using an AI file lawsuits against the Copyright Office and say, no, my work should be protected by copyright. None of those lawsuits has yet reached anywhere near a decision phase. So we will see the Copyright Office's answer being tested. Now, there's a fair amount of subtlety that I've glossed over in that overview of all three of these questions, but hopefully during the discussion, we can get into more of the details.
Yeah, so I want to have a few more questions for you, Tyler. First of all, I just wanted to flag the fact that I've heard a lot of discussion about whether the companies developing these tools can be seen as infringing copyright. I haven't heard much discussion about the potential liability for putting in a particular prompt and what you get as the user. So I think that's a really interesting and underexplored topic. A couple of other things. I had wondered whether a prompt itself could be copyrighted. Do you have thoughts on that?
So the typical prompt won't be protected by copyright law. Copyright law says that short words and phrases can't be protected by copyright. Words are the building blocks that we use to create copyrighted works, but the words and phrases themselves cannot be. So a typical short prompt would not be protected by copyright. The longer and more complex the prompt becomes, the more likely that it crosses the line over into something that is sufficiently creative from the viewpoint of the law that it could be protected by copyright. But even there, we're really stretching things, right? The typical prompt will still only be a sentence, maybe a dozen words or fewer. 20 words, is that potentially copyrightable? Possibly, but still really on the edge of what might be protected by copyright. You really have to make a prompt that looks more like a essay or at least a paragraph in order for the Copyright Office to consider registering it and in order for courts to consider it to be protected.
And what is the relationship between copyright and unfair competition claims? So for example, could the FTC go after companies for unfair competition, even if using copyrighted material as training data is deemed to be fair use?
So in the United States, I consider that extremely unlikely. The notion of unfair competition in the United States is largely limited to things that might be considered misleading or deceptive. Such as trademark infringement that might confuse consumers into thinking one company is associated with another, such as false advertising and so forth. And I don't really see the use of AI models being deceptive in any fundamental way. In European countries, however, the concept of unfair competition is quite a bit broader, and it includes things like copying that might or might not be considered to infringe copyright law, but might be considered unfair competition for one business to copy the products of a competitor, for example. So it seems to me in Europe, there's considerably greater likelihood that unfair competition law may come into play with AI than there is in the United States.
Thank you very much. So before we move on, I just want to give the three of you an opportunity to kind of add to or respond to what the others have said. What are your thoughts, given everything we've gotten to so far?
Super interesting stuff, from both Tyler and Cassie. Yeah, amazing. I wanted to comment a little bit about this, about what Cassie was sharing. Really interesting stuff about, her perspective around kind of the lack of control and how, Cassie, you mentioned around maybe if you trained it on your own data, maybe is there some way to kind of like twist it so it would actually be useful. And this is something I've actually studied for about 10 years, this idea of how do you collaborate with machines. It's interesting how when creative machines first come in, there's this worship the machine phase. And it happened in academia, and we're seeing it right now in industry, where it's like, oh, look what it's doing all by itself, even when it's not all by itself. And a lot of effort on like, how do you make it like just click of a button, and what are the limits here? But what I actually feel is a lot more interesting is how you get it to work with you. You can have a really, really smart person sitting next to you, but if you can't communicate with them, you can't really sort of benefit from the engagement with this really, really smart person. If you and the person don't speak the same language, or if it's just a very difficult person to communicate with because of their personality or any number of reasons, how well you can interact with another human being makes a huge difference to the kind of work you can create together. How well you interact with a creative machine makes a huge difference to what you can create together. And that's something that finally, the world is starting to wake up to. So one of my favorite examples is Adobe's Firefly. It's in beta. A lot of the best features are not even developed yet, but at least they're thinking about it in the right direction. That tool seems to have this idea that we're going to help artists create what they want with the help of AI, rather than good luck to the artists, figure out how to deal with a smart machine. So we're moving in that direction. Everything I do in music is purely to support the intent of the human. The human is always in full control, 100% control. So just really cool to hear Kathy speak about it kind of as the authentic real life experience of an artist.
So two things that Maya just said, or two responses to what Maya just said that come to me. One is a historical example that had to do with the invention of photography, which of course is more than 150 years old now. But during the 19th century, you had very similar questions confronting copyright law. Was photography simply the product of a machine? And would we recognize copyright in the product of a machine? And those questions were resolved by saying that the photographer who controls the machine is the author or the artist and gets a copyright. And we may ultimately end up seeing something similar here after the dust is settled. Legal questions always take a long time to resolve. They're typically a decade or two behind where the technology is. And the second thing that she said is that the involvement of the human in the creation of the work is very important. And what we've seen the Copyright Office saying is if you just push a button and a work comes out, that's not copyright protection. But when you have an iterative process where a human being is selecting and arranging things that have come out of the machine, that can result in a copyrighted work. And the most prominent example right now is this comic book that was registered with the Copyright Office. And the title of the comic book is escaping my recollection at the moment. But it was submitted for copyright registration. The Copyright Office said, this is fine. This falls within copyrightable subject matter. And then the artist started making public statements about how she'd used an AI. And the Copyright Office says, oh, now we have to take a harder look. Now we have to reconsider whether your work is in fact copyrightable. And they ended up with an opinion letter that basically says the individual images are not copyrightable, but that the selection and arrangement of images made by a human is copyrightable. So when we ask, well, are the products of these things protected by copyright? It's a much more subtle answer. How much human involvement was there in creating something? And, can we say that there's creativity not in a single prompt, but in honing a prompt to get what the artist has in their mind? And I think there's an argument to be made for that. I don't think the Copyright Office is going to be terribly receptive to it, but again, law is an iterative process. So what the Copyright Office decides gets judged in the courts. What the courts decides can be changed by the legislature. So where we end up 20, 30 years from now may be very different from where we are today.
I mean, it might be different even in 5 years, let alone that far out. But one question we got from the audience was about authorship. So this relates to what you were just saying. Do you think there's a chance that AI could be seen in terms of copyright as a co-author, or it would really be just as a tool that a human being is using?
Currently, the position in both the U.S. Patent Office and the U.S. Copyright Office is that an AI is not an author and is not eligible for authorship. Their position is that it will take legislative change for that to happen. Now, of course, it's possible that a court might disagree with that and find that existing law and AI could be a co-author. I think that's rather unlikely. I think it would take legislative change. We have seen countries where legislation does permit authorship in AI-generated works, but I think they are awarding the authorship to the users rather than the AI itself, or rather than the creators of the AI. But of course, a legal system could decide to change that if they think there's a good reason for doing that.
I wonder if AI could be considered work for hire. Because although for a lot of them you're not paying, or you're paying just like pennies to have it generate images, somebody is paying, right? So there's some kind of, money changing hands. And so you're directing somebody to do work for you. So people say, oh, ChatGPT for whatever is like having a junior high schooler, intern writing your first draft for you or something like that. So in that way, it does feel like work for hire. It's not the end result and you are directing it. But that might be like a way where it would say AI is not acceptable as the author because it would be for hire. One thing I wanted to note is, so someone is talking on the Q&A about like what are the best image generators, and Dolly is not the best one. So I've looked at a few, like Midjourney is the one in which that graphic novel was created, and that apparently has like a certain look to it. There's Stable Diffusion, and then there's places where you can upload your own training set and try to figure something out on your own. But I did notice with a lot of these platforms that they do have agreements where they're saying the images that come out are not owned by, or you own them, but so does everybody else who puts in the same prompt. Or they might say, you know what, we own your prompt also, which I think is what I found on Midjourney. And that made me like kind of nervous because I felt as I was entering my prompts that are the conceptual core of my artwork, I felt like I was giving something away. Like, I'm like, this is the creative part that I'm kind of speaking into this machine, and I don't know what's going to come out, but is it worth it to me to let go of that into the environment or this company or whatever, and give away like my idea, which really feels like the whole reason why I make work. So my own work, because it's narrative driven, I feel like I might be more likely to use like ChatGPT in some form to like generate the stories or have a turn of a phrase created for me as I create the work, and not necessarily the imagery, which seems to follow the story along. But it might be a different case for artists that have more of an observational approach to work. Then they might have a different interaction with the machine. But for me, it made me nervous to say like my conceptual narrative, because that's like the core of like what I do.
I think it's interesting. Maya mentioned this notion that some people have that it's the machine doing it. It's click of a button, right? And then Kathy talked about feeling the need to train herself and how to get what she wanted, which suggests it's not a click of a button kind of thing, maybe for very simple things. But if you're trying to generate more complex things, there's more training and more understanding that the users need than they might have right now. And I think go ahead, Maya.
I think part of the problem is this bizarre focus on prompt engineering. It's a horrible user interface. It's awful. It's like one of the worst ideas that I've seen go popular.
Talk for a second about what prompt engineering is.
It's just like trying to communicate to the Midjourney, ChatGPT through speech, right? As if it's another person. And of course, it's not another person. So when you write a prompt, if you don't get what you want, then you need to go back to the drawing board and find a different way to communicate with this. And you might have to do it 100 times before it finally understands what you want. And probably it will never understand exactly what you want if what you want is nuanced. It's really silly. There's no reason for generative AI. Like, the relationship between generative AI and prompt engineering is like equating these two is like equating food with ice cream. Sure, ice cream is a type of food, not all food is ice cream. Right? Like, not all generative AI needs to be interfaced with through prompt engineering. And it's a very, very slow realization in industry. Most academic systems, the great majority, were not through prompts. That was not the interactive mechanism for most generative AI systems. The systems I built that help millions of people write songs. You can't put in a prompt. That's not how it works. Finally, with Firefly is kind of starting to expand a little bit beyond prompt engineering, but it's still a part of it. So yeah, we need different ways of communicating with these machines that make a lot more sense than the current extremely narrow model, which is going to be also a niche for copyright. If a lot of copyright ends up dancing around prompt engineering, then suddenly they're going to have to reinvent a lot of that as well.
It occurs to me also that we've talked about generative AI in terms of images and in terms of text and even in terms of composing music, but there's also the voice generation aspect, right? Which has its own deeply interesting ethical implications if you can make deep fakes of somebody's voice that are completely credible and likely trained on their own speech on data collected by them without anybody intending that, which also reminds me, by the way, that we are recording this and we will put it online. So everything we are saying now is probably going to be scraped and used in one of these models. So I'm going to start interspersing questions from the audience. Please keep adding those. And this is, I think, for all three of you, but it says especially for Tyler, how do you think about the harvesting of training data? This data is often copyrighted images or text, and it's used to produce non-copyrightable output by machine. How does the law deal with the loss of human creativity and effort historically?
So the lawsuits are just starting. We do not have any lawsuits that have been resolved yet on the issue of training data. It's quite clear that when you're training an AI and you are ingesting data, that is copying in the traditional sense, unless you have gotten permission from the people that have generated those images, that text, that music, whatever data set that you're using to train it on. Copying that in order to train the machine is unquestionably a copyright infringement unless the law is going to say that it's a fair use within the meaning of the Copyright Act. And the Copyright Act literally says that the fair use of a copyrighted work is not an infringement of copyright. It leaves it up to courts to decide what is fair use on a case-by-case basis. The statute gives 6 examples of things that are somewhat more likely to be fair uses, but they're non-exclusive. Those are criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, or research. If of any of those 6 things, this looks most like research. And then the statute also gives us 4 factors to consider in deciding whether or not something is a fair use. And without getting into the details, I think the precedent that most closely supports using large amounts of data as a training data set is the Google Books case. So Google, as we all know, scanned literally millions of books to create a database that can be searched, a full text database that can be searched for text. And they were sued by authors and publishers who owned the copyrights in the books that were scanned. And the US Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit held that Google's use was a fair use, so long as they did not then turn around and display the text of those books to users other than tiny short snippets to show the context of where the search terms appeared in the book. Because you could not regenerate the experience of reading the book or of reading large portions of the book using Google Books, except where it was done with the author's or publisher's permission, right? So when you use Google Books, sometimes you can read large amounts of text. Either those are public domain works, or they are works where they have gotten the permission of the copyright owners. But if Google does not have permission of the copyright owner, you will only get small snippets of text from a book. And the Court of Appeals held that that was fair use. So if you analogize to that, ingesting large amounts of text to create a searchable database was a fair use. I think there's a very strong case that ingesting large amounts of text, large amounts of images or music to train an AI will be considered a fair use. It furthers the purposes of copyright, which is to incentivize more creativity. And authors and artists using these AI tools can be even more creative than they've been without them. So I think the issues are going to be the output of the AI. Is it too close to something else to be infringing? is it going to be protected by copyright itself? There are lawsuits about the training data, and there will continue to be lawsuits about the training data. I think the most likely outcome is that the use of the training data will be a fair use. But again, it's going to take us 5 years, 10 years before the law considers that to be a relatively settled question.
Would it be a fair use because it's so transformative, because the output is very, very different and cannot be said to replace the original works?
It's transformative in that sense, in the sense that the output is sufficiently different that it is not a substitute for specific copyrighted works, right? As you say, can it replace them? Yes, as a functional matter, it can replace them, but copyright isn't trying to protect you from competition from other types of creative works. It's trying to protect you from competition from a work that is too similar to your own. But it's also transformative in a different way, which is that it enables other persons to create new things. And that was a new meaning of transformative that came out in a different case involving Google, the Oracle versus Google software case, where Google had copied the names of the programs in the Java AI interface, but had written all of its own code. And they said they did that because they wanted programmers who were already familiar with Java to be able to write in Android. And the Supreme Court said, well, that serves the purposes of copyright to enable third persons to create new things. And so I see that fitting within that precedent as well.
So I'm curious, leaving fair use doctrine aside, whether all three of you, and maybe especially Kathy and Maya, who are not lawyers, whether you see this as being fair, since we're also talking about ethics, right? Is it fair to collect the data in these massive data sets and then use it in this way?
I think one aspect that I hear missing from the conversation is what these systems actually do. Like there's so much emphasis on how they do it. You know, we all have brains inside of our heads, right? These machine learning models are brains. We consume data all the time that we don't pay for. That's well known, right? And yet there are things that we are allowed and not allowed to do. I'm not allowed to go out and pretend to be Cassie and pretend to be and just like actively imitate her work, right? There are consequences for behaving like this for human beings, even if we have the data in our heads to do it, right? There's a lot more stuff that we can but are not allowed to do that have nothing to do with, you know, sophisticated brain functioning. So I think there is not enough focus on what these software companies are doing, what they're allowing their machine learning systems to do. For example, why are you allowing people to type in prompts with artist names? Why is your system responding positively to this? It's very easy to block. This is not a matter of these companies' inabilities to block these behaviors. They have brilliant machine learning teams. I mean, if my small company could figure out how to protect artists at many, many different levels, those big companies could do it if they wanted to. It's the opposite. They want you to imitate artists in order to sell their products. Very, very intentionally, DALL-E was giving sample prompts that listed people's names in them. They were pushing for this use case. So I feel like these companies are doing openly unethical things, and we're like, oh, let's look at your machine learning model and tell you how to build models. Let's try to get into your how, instead of like, no, you're not allowed to do this. This is openly unethical. So it's really, I don't know. I find it a little bit funny the way that the conversation is formed, instead of simply drawing lines on what we are okay with and not okay with on the outset. Because, by the way, you can imitate people without having their data. This capability exists to various degrees forever. We were talking about voice generation, which, by the way, is not exactly generative AI, but it is definitely like a little bit related. You could find somebody with a very similar voice and train on them. And then is that legal for me to then make songs in the voice of Taylor Swift because I technically did not train on her voice. It's absurd, right? So I feel like we need more focus on this more obvious layer of how these systems behave.
Kathy, did you want to add?
Well, I think it's interesting what Maya has brought up about how our brains intake information all the time, which is similar to what these networks are doing, gathering this information. And one thing that I was nervous about using generative AI is because I didn't want it to like ruin my own ideas. So what I'm explaining is like when you see like a music video and you witness the visuals and hear the music at the same time, it can be very difficult forever to separate those things in your mind, and it might like ruin the music forever. And so I thought, well, if I type in my own prompts, to try to make artwork like my own, what if I see like this terrible stuff or stuff I don't like or what? But now I feel like it'll be in me. Like I can't erase it. Like I will have seen it. So that idea that our minds are always gathering data is an interesting comparison to how these networks work. So thank you for bringing that up.
It's interesting too. I mean, in terms of one of the questions we got from the audience is whether the sort of content providers, artists, or just people posting on the internet should somehow be compensated for the content. We don't know how that would work, but we know that companies like Reddit, for example, are making it much harder, or well, they're making it so their stuff can't just be scraped for free, and they will start to charge for people to scrape Reddit. But that means the company is going to get funding, and it's not clear whether that will trickle down to the Reddit users, right? I think part of the disconnect here is that people are concerned that the sort of, small, well, all of us, not small fish, but all of us are putting out stuff on the internet, and then certain powerful companies or other organizations are benefiting while the ones who are, putting art and words and voices on the internet are not. Is that something that's going to be, are we going to think differently about that after using these tools for a while, do you think? Or do you think that there will be restrictions on how data can be collected instead?
So, I mean, that's obviously the big question here, both today and for the future, and both legal and ethical, is how are we going to compensate artists today and in the future? And is it important to compensate them when their work is being used to train something? I like Maya's perspective that we don't think there's anything wrong when a person ingests large amounts of data, right? When, we want works to be read, we want works to be viewed, that's what they're for. And we don't think necessarily that you have to pay per view. But at the same time, you have to get the book from somewhere, right? Somebody has to buy the book, or a library has to buy the book so you can borrow it. A museum has to buy the work so you can get it in the gallery. You may have to pay admission to get it in the museum. So there are funding models that are just somewhat more indirect. Maya's problem is, she wants the law to focus on the conduct more than on how the conduct is accomplished. The reason it doesn't is because law is always using existing tools to apply to new things. And so, we're looking at existing laws and say, well, what do existing laws say I can and can't do? And we're trying to manipulate them in such ways that they'll apply to new things, rather than what a legislature ideally should be doing, which is, okay, let's ask those big questions. What do we want to have happen and not happen in the future? And of course, once the legislature passed the law, it's a little hard to change. And when the technology is evolving so quickly, you don't want to have laws that freeze things in a particular state that can't be adapted more easily down the road. And so, maybe you end up with saying, okay, we'll give discretion to an administrative agency and maybe they can be more flexible. But then there's often a lot of regulatory capture by the people being, where the people being regulated are too close with the regulators. So there are lots and lots of problems. But the reason we're focusing on the how is, people can ingest data by looking at it or listening to it. Machines only ingest data through copying. And so naturally, lawyers are going to say, oh, that's copyright, even though I agree with Maya that shouldn't be the focus from an ethical point of view.
There's also the question of scale, right? Because none of us can ingest 10% of the internet. So that's kind of a distinction between how we operate and how they do, among many other distinctions.
All right, but let's, building on what you said there, right? That's such an important point. We can't ingest 10% of the internet. So look what's happening then. And granted, I see the problems and I really think that we should be fixing them. But we now have brains that can do this. Like the opportunities for positive impact are enormous, right? If it's like basically we have a whole bunch of greedy players who couldn't care less how much damage they cause. Meanwhile, you have like people in the legal profession trying desperately to mitigate the damages that's already happening, that's probably going to happen. And what sort of falls by the wayside is how much positive can be done now that we do have these incredibly powerful brains that can consume way more data than any of us ever could. Just had to throw this in there.
No, absolutely. And I think this is an interesting distinction between generative AI and other types of AI, because I think people have been wondering whether the generative tools can have as much positive impact as some of the other tools that are used to, try to predict earthquakes or to analyze, agricultural data. So the question of benefits and harms and who gets the benefits and who gets the harms is very much in play here. I want to get to another question from an audience member, which is, do you feel that search engines are already moving to treat search queries as prompts because they are now generating summaries of results? Right, the integration of generative AI into search.
It's, that's the whole problem. That's like the whole problem with how the entire planet is thinking about this. It's genuinely upsetting for me. It's almost like we have this amazing new thing and everybody's like, okay, how do I use this amazing new thing to solve problems that we're already like, to sort of approaching a new world with an old world mindset. They're like, okay, search can make a lot of money. How do I take generative AI and twist it into something that would work for search? Now, the whole point of generative AI is that it's divergent, is that it can explore a whole bunch of possibilities, that it's wildly imaginative. Instead, they're taking these systems and desperately trying to create convergent systems from them, something that's going to tell us the truth. And of course, they're failing abysmally. Using ChatGPT as a search engine doesn't work, okay? It hallucinates. Like anytime you ask it something that's not greatest common denominator of human knowledge, that's not super well known and repeated on the internet thousands of times, it makes up answers because that's what generative AI does. It's highly imaginative. So this is just another example of misuse of generative AI. Maybe they'll manage to make it kind of work eventually, but it's a very, very, very problematic use case that immediately leads to volumes and volumes of misinformation. And same thing with almost any other well-funded application of generative AI. Focuses on previous ways of looking at AI. How do you do it to take care of the boring things? How do you make it like generative AI is this incredibly powerful creative force that can be used to massively elevate human creativity, massively. And instead, we're trying to put it in this little box of the previous way that AI works.
So I have another question, unless you guys want to add to that. I have a question to ask Kathy, which is, do you think that generative AI may help people to realize that creativity is inherently a relational endeavor?
That's a good question. Because I think prior to this panel, Irina, you had asked me if I thought that AI is part of the general good if people can put in a prompt and get something, pretty that they like and say, look at the art that I made, and it's satisfying in that way. But you're right, you would be collaborating with the system to get something that's really satisfying. So I do think that's important. And what Maya is saying also, because Maya is an engineer and I'm not, so I'm an end user. So my entry into this is really like prompt based, unless someone creates like a stable diffusion interface that I can use with sliders and things like that, that really helps me out, because I can't develop that myself. But some of these things are still free, but now there's really going to be this paywall that's going to inhibit a lot. So, and as Maya said, those things are going to lead to what people want to buy. And so there might be tailored in how the systems are used, and a lot of that potential will be lost. So I'm wondering, as an individual that would like to be able to explore this, in the future, I can see coming up against this paywall or my lack of coding experience, and wondering how will I be able to like reach that potential on my own. So Maya's recommending Firefly.
So do you feel, Kathy, that this can enhance people's creativity, or is there something lost if you are putting a prompt in rather than taking pencil to paper or clay in your hand or some other medium?
Well, because art is a lot of just really decision making, and there's technical skills for various things, but when you come right down to it, you're deciding, like, I'm pushing the clay this way, or I'm pushing the clay that way, or I'm moving my pencil here or there. And so similarly, when you're confronted with an image generated, you still have to choose between 4, and you're going to decide one that, whatever you like. And then, do you want to enhance that? What direction do you take for that? So you would still be making creative decisions as you take it down the road. So it does, I think, make people more visually aware, like it heightens their sensitivity to it as they make these decisions. So that is like part of art practice there. That's part of a big part of being an artist, is looking at things and making decisions, recognizing different forms. Whether you put words to it or not, you're making little vocabularies and structures in what you see as you go through the results.
So we're almost out of time, and I want to make sure that we have time for any closing comments from all 3 of you. What would you like people to take away from this? Maya just passionately gave a whole monologue, but maybe you can summarize it still. Why don't we start with Tyler?
So we've only scratched the surface here. There are some great questions in the Q&A that would take all day to address. And I've said what I had to say about copyright law. I just want to conclude with one brief thing concerning rights of publicity. We talked about imitating a particular person or a particular voice. If that imitation is deceptive, that would definitely violate existing law. If it's not deceptive, if you know somebody's imitating somebody else, that's entertainment, and that's probably protected by the First Amendment. We've talked about doing something in the style of someone else. Apologies for the leaf blower outside my door. We've talked about imitating works in the style of something else. Copyright doesn't attempt to protect style. It attempts to protect works. So it would have to be a combination of style and subject that would create a legal barrier to doing that.
And Kathy?
I'm just grateful for this opportunity to think out loud about some of the challenges that I have, because I'm not using generative AI regularly in my practice. I will be in the future. And so these questions are important for those people that make their living from creative works. And so I was just very happy to be here and listen to everyone's thoughts. And thank you for the questions.
Thank you. And Maya?
Yeah, this was amazing. I mean, not surprising at all that Irina put together a great panel. Tyler, I mean, really some most cogent description of legal challenges around generative AI and why things can't move forward in a more straightforward way. Kathy, I mean, the discussion we had today is really my favorite type of generative AI discourse, because I think the best use case is to help creatives, and the only people who know how this stuff can help them are the creatives. So I would love at some point to hear what you wish existed. That would be so wonderful. The only reason that I was able to build systems that really help people, because in my parallel life, I'm a musician, and I imagined what would help me. And that's where kind of that interaction was made up. So thanks so much, everybody. And I hope our audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you all. And I will close by saying that ethicists talk about living the good life. And I think we're all trying to figure out still how generative AI tools figure into living that good life, right? And I really appreciate all three of you taking your time and giving us your perspectives. Thank you for everybody who joined, and see you at some future events.